Welcome back to another episode on Learn with Dylan. Today I'm here with John, who I've just recently come into communication with. And today the main topics we're going to talk about is understanding yourself, emotions, and neurodivergence. Hopefully I pronounced that right.
Yeah, that's
So,
right.
John, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, really good to meet you too. It's the first time I've been on a podcast down under, expanding my networks and my connections. So yeah, it's great to be with you.
That is the power of the internet, is like I can just talk to
Absolutely.
someone and you're in Ireland, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, for those who don't know you, can you just give a little bit of intro of who you are and what kind of work you do at the moment?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So like you said, Dylan, I live in Ireland. I live in the southwest coast, right on the Atlantic Ocean, as far west in Europe as you can get. Next stop is Boston or Chicago in the US. And I grew up in like a small, very rural farming area. So that's irrelevant to what I do professionally now because it would never have been foreseen that I would be doing what I do now when I was growing up.
Okay.
The likelihood is that I would have become a dairy farmer or something like that in my
Yeah.
locality. That would have been the tradition. But from a young age, I was very interested in psychology. I was just really fascinated by other people and by myself and what was the whole reason for living. The fact that we're on this moving rock that spins around the galaxy for a limited period of time, I find really fascinating when I step back and think about that and think, well, what's the purpose? Because we get so caught up in going to school, getting a job, paying taxes, seeking fulfillment, and then we die. And I'm like, okay, well, what's the purpose? Like, why? Why is this happening? So I get really into psychology, personal development, anything in that forum, really. Some more spiritual practices as well. And these days, I predominantly work as a counselor and a coach, both for personal development with individuals privately, and then I do a lot of professional development in organizations as well, some more executive coaching or leadership development and training.
Yeah, I noticed that. I was checking your website out earlier, and you have a whole team.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, well, not so much a team, but people, colleagues that I work with. So I would say associates. I don't know
Yeah.
if that's a transferable language across continents, but yeah, so they don't necessarily work for me. They have their own businesses, and then we collaborate a lot. So
That's
it's kind
people
of all,
base.
yeah, we're all independent freelancers, I guess is the best way to say it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay.
Mm.
Yeah, because I was looking through your website, just learning a little bit about yourself, and it seems like you have quite a bit of credibility under your belt. Like you've done a few bloody few courses. Like, can you run us through some of the courses you've
Yeah.
done? And
Sure. Yeah, I'm a bit of an eternal course king.
no,
I'm
yeah,
all, yeah, I'm always on a course. I just love learning. I love learning so much. Sometimes it's not even for the qualification, it's to really see what I can learn about myself and others through the process. I guess I have a bit of a back to front story, which tends to be part of how I've lived my life.
mm,
So I didn't really do very well in school and I wasn't interested either. I felt school was pointless because we were learning loads of stuff I wasn't interested in.
yeah,
Um, and so I didn't perform very well in my final exams. So that didn't allow me to get into university. So I did this course in complementary health. I trained to become a masseuse reflexologist and a diet and nutrition practitioner. So
yeah,
that was like my entry into the world professionally.
mm,
I was always into complementary or holistic health growing up because my parents were.
mm,
So that felt like a nice thing to do, even if it was just learning for me about how to take care of myself and my body. And then I decided I didn't really want to work with that because I realized through doing the training that I didn't like touching people. So
oh,
kind of a prerequisite, of doing that job, but still learned a lot and still some relevant to what I do today. And then I got a job in a retail company. So I needed to get a job. I needed to earn my own money. I was about 19. And I was just very lucky that I found myself in this quite progressive company. It was a UK based company.
mm,
And at 19, I became a trainee manager and got sent on a management leadership and development program.
okay,
I got trained to be a coach during that program. And I got introduced into something called transactional analysis, which is a social psychology.
Okay.
That then sent me into psychotherapy training. So I trained for 7 years to become a transactional analyst psychotherapist, which
Mm.
is a subsection of psychoanalysis. I'm very interested in Freud and Jung and those early thinkers. And then I have done loads of learning then in and around the realm of psychotherapy, coaching, personal development
Mm.
that covers all matters of things from thinking, feeling, and then more spiritual based practices. So I also trained as a Celtic shaman in Ireland,
Oh, okay.
which is a more indigenous
Yeah, yeah.
way of working. So yeah, I work in loads of different ways. One of the things that I like to pride myself on doing is that the client who comes to work with me doesn't have to adapt themselves to me,
Mm.
that I have many different ways of working and I can meet the client where they need to be
Mm.
met, because people arrive with different needs, different
Yeah.
preferences, different styles. Yeah.
Because everyone's different. Everyone has a different angle that you've got to figure out, okay, what's going to work best for this person.
Exactly, yeah. And it has become kind of common that a lot of practitioners have they're like, this is the way that I work. And then the client needs to make a decision of like, will I make that work for me,
Mm.
or will I go find somebody else? And I'm a bit of a chameleon, I guess you could
Oh,
say.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think it is all about your relationship with your therapist as well. That is super important, and I'm sure you can vouch on that.
Mhm. Yeah, for
I'm saying
sure.
about that too with your friends.
Well, yes.
Yeah. Another psychotherapist.
Yes,
Look
that's
at
right.
that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks for sort of giving a little bit of introductory, and we'll just jump onto the first topic, which is just
Yeah.
learning about yourself. So your page is all about becoming you, which I love.
Mm.
I love that. So what's one thing that you wish more people understood about themselves? I know that can be a very sort of broad question, but what's the
Mm.
first thing that comes to mind?
I guess as you asked me that right now, the first thing that like pops into my head is that you probably are not who you think you are.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm not sure everybody realizes that.
No.
Yeah. And that for me has been the spark that has really changed my life, about stepping out of the many invitations I was given by the world, the
Mm.
society, culture, my family, workplaces, and kind of go, actually, no, that's not me. Thank you, but no, thank you. And that's difficult because that usually then is the path less trodden,
Mm. And
and
you
you
feel,
become an outlier.
yeah, you feel lost, and
Yeah,
yeah, I can relate to that. Usually people want you, what is best going to serve them. They want that version of you, not necessarily what's going to best serve you. Mm.
yeah, definitely.
Everyone sees it like, everyone sees everyone differently, through many filters and belief
Yes,
systems, and I don't know too much about yourself, but your like say your family or your friends, every person is going to look at you differently
definitely.
through
Yeah.
their
And
life and
that's
their beliefs and their.
one of the things that I find fascinating, because what often happens is that we then take all of these views that other people have of us and we internalize them. Okay, well, that must be who I am then. And that's how we maybe begin to make sense of our identity. Whereas I believe that's kind of like an externalization getting internalized. Whereas I believe that who you really are authentically is on the inside, and that needs to be washed out.
Hmm. For anyone listening, and hopefully you have seen this, I would recommend watching Inside Out. Inside Out? Have
Yes,
you seen
that's
that?
right. Yeah.
That is a great. I love that movie. I'll definitely
Yeah,
recommend.
they did a really good job with that.
Okay. And where do you usually start when helping someone like reconnect with who they really are? Like, what is when you first meet a client and say they're, feeling a bit lost, feeling a bit disconnected, maybe, they're getting 20,000 different opinions of saying, like, go this way, do this. What would your advice be?
So if I'm working with them, I
Mm.
don't tend to give them advice because they're probably getting a lot of that already. They're probably getting a lot of, you should do this, you should do that, this is who you are. So what I tend to do is to interrupt. I try to be quite provocative and confrontational.
Okay.
So to give the person like a different experience of what it might be like to be in a relationship with someone.
It's interesting. Yeah, tell us more.
Yeah. So like if somebody was sitting on my sofa and I'm facing them and they're sharing something with me, I'm always looking out for opportunities to go, is that true? Like, is what you've said there really how you think and feel?
Mm.
And really trying to invite them into a place of critical reflection.
Mm.
Yeah, because I find a lot of people come into my consulting room and what they do is they're repeating a lot of what they've been given, which is understandable. They may feel lost, confused, helpless, hopeless, even sometimes. So what I try to do is invite them to get in contact with themselves rather than repeating all of the conditioning or stuff that's been projected onto them. And that's different for different people because people are all arriving at different ages, stages, levels of awareness. But usually, how I find it most effective is by questioning the things they tell me, not in a kind of like a undermining way, but more using curiosity, being very curious about who they are. And the other thing that I hold internally, it's not probably something I don't necessarily share with people, an excitement to get to know who they are.
Yeah, that's nice. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Not who I want them to be,
Yeah.
because that could be another pitfall. You know, my perfect client or the type of client I want or anything like that. But genuine, open curiosity of, oh, I wonder who I'm going to meet today.
Mm.
I wonder what their story is. And of course, I'm in a total privileged position of really getting to hear people's inner thoughts, feelings, you know, which you don't often get. So I take that quite seriously as well, because I think it is a privilege.
Yeah, definitely. If someone's opening up to you, yeah, that definitely is privilege. Okay. Now we'll jump onto the next subject. So talking about one thing that you really wanted to talk about today was neurodivergence and just mental health in general. So you're telling me that you're autistic, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I kind of these days say I'm a multi-neurodivergent person because I have an official diagnosis of autism, ADHD, and dyslexia. And I self-identify as being dyspraxic and dyscalculic. And all of that happened
What
when
are
I
the
was an
last two
adult.
mean? What
The
is
last two. So dyscalculic is basically dyslexia, but for numbers.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So it's calculations.
Yeah.
And dyspraxic is your motor skills and coordination. So I would be very, like, I always thought I was clumsy, a bit like I thought I was lazy, but actually I was dyslexic.
Ah.
So I regularly drop things out. It just slides out of the palm of my hand.
Oh,
Or I'll to like open a door and I'll miss the handle. So I have to work extra hard, you know, make sure that I'm looking at it, because if I make eye contact, usually I won't miss, but it's that sort of peripheral vision stuff that I have challenges with. So that is categorized as a form of neurodiversity as well, or neurodivergence.
yeah. Well, what are some signs that, you know, someone might be neurodivergent but might not realize it, that you've come across from like personal experience from working with the people in your fields? What are some, common signs? Someone might be listening to this and be like, oh wow, actually, I might be doing that.
So it's an interesting question because we're in the middle of a big change in the UK and Ireland. I'm not quite sure what it's like in other places, but in the UK and Ireland, there's like this big realization happening that we totally misunderstood neurodivergence.
Okay.
And a lot of the preconceived ideas of what a person who's autistic or has ADHD might look like or behave like is really being called into question.
Okay.
So it's quite broad, first of all. So there is the kind of classic developmental signs that parents would see in children, which is kind of the thing that we always knew, right, over the last 30, 40, 50 years. What's happening now, though, is there's a huge wave of adults being identified as being neurodivergent who weren't picked up when they were kids, like their peers were, because they weren't showing these developmental delays like speech delays, or they found it difficult to have friends, or there was school refusal or things like that. It was like for all intents and purposes, they looked like everything was going fine.
Yeah.
So these are a cohort of neurodivergent people that maybe had a higher ability to mask,
Mm.
or maybe ability is the wrong word. It's probably a poor choice of words. A higher capacity to mask, maybe.
Yeah.
Um, and they were hiding the struggles internally that they were facing. And then as adults, they become aware because they've become burnt out. So burnout, I would say, is probably the single biggest indicator that neurodivergence as an adult might be a factor to consider.
Mm.
Neurodivergent adults who were not identified as children typically go in cycles of burnout.
Okay.
And that could be complete burnout where they have to just like stop everything for a year. They're exhausted. They might have developed a chronic illness or an autoimmune condition. Or it could be they need like 3 weeks sick leave from work because they're burnt out and on stress leave or whatever. And then they go back. So burnout is number one. Then sensory things.
Mm.
So textures, smells, sounds, anybody who has like strong preferences that maybe they manage, so they'll just say, oh, that really irritates me, but I'm not going to say anything about it
Mm.
because, that's the appropriate thing to do, is to not say anything about it. But if things like that really bother you, then that's often a sign of neurodiversity. And
That's
then issues around focus, procrastination, and then issues around reading, writing, doing calculations, and like I was saying, coordination. So these are all factors to consider. Not any one of them would indicate neurodivergence. It's when there's a consistent pattern across several different areas, so I don't want anybody listening thinking, oh, I have that, I must be neurodivergent. Might not be. It's more complex than that, but those things that I've mentioned are definitely indicators.
okay. Yeah.
Mm.
And so I have heard when adults get diagnosed with ADHD, they can either go great and they might get on some medication and maybe that will really help them, or maybe it won't, because sometimes I've heard that it can really numb your emotions and then you can't feel the highs and lows of life, because it just sort of numbs your emotions a little bit. So what I'm sort of asking you is, what's your opinion on people sort of labeling, having ADHD is bad, or using it as, like, I don't want to say an excuse, but at the same time I do, of like, oh,
Yeah.
do you know what I mean?
No, I do know what you mean. Yeah, I think that's definitely a factor to consider. So my perspective on that would be that right now, neurodivergence is generally seen through the lens of the medical model,
Mm,
which means that it's a psychiatric diagnosable condition,
mm,
which means it's in this document called the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistics Manual. It's
mm,
where all diagnostical conditions are listed and what the symptoms are. And it's how psychiatrists and clinical psychologists do their work, because they consult the DSM to see, does this person fit these categories? And that's always been highly contested by the neurodivergent community generally, that like we don't believe that autism and ADHD are neurodevelopmental disorders, and therefore they shouldn't be in the DSM. And seeing them as a medical condition that needs treatment is really unhelpful. And
mm,
one of the reasons it's very unhelpful is because people can internalize labels, like you've said.
mm,
So it's like, oh, there's something wrong with me. I have a disease.
mm,
From my perspective, being autistic and ADHD and the other experiences that I have are all really positive things for me. Like now that I understand how I am and how I experience the world, I can take care of myself in a much more
mm,
effective way, and I can meet my own needs in a much more effective way. So for me, it's less about something being wrong with me and a kind of a reason to opt out of doing things or avoid doing things. And it's more empowering so that I can make choices that work for
mm.
me.
Yeah.
So I think the medical model is probably the biggest issue with what you're talking about.
Yeah. And so I know a couple of people who have ADHD or even autism, and it's like their superpower.
Mm,
It's
yeah.
they're so good at working, and they're so efficient, but then they might, be not the best in other avenues.
Yeah, exactly. And that's often the
This
case. Like,
superpower can be an excuse.
totally. Yeah, I also think that like there's a general misconception in the public as well, generally speaking about these things, and sometimes that gets projected onto people. So a lot of the work that I do in Becoming You is supporting people to understand their neurodivergence or other elements of their identity to make them sense in a way that empowers them to live a life that is successful and feels good for them within their needs.
Okay. Awesome. All right. Well, I think we'll wrap it up for tonight. Try and keep it nice and tight. We might do another one in the future. Thank you so much for joining me tonight, John. For
Yeah,
anyone
it's been
who
great
is
meeting you.
interested in reaching out to you, where will they contact you?
So they can go on my website. It's www.becomingyou.ie. I'm also on Instagram and other social media as well.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, John. I'll log off now.
Great. Thanks, Dylan.